Well, I would like to repeat once again, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the third session. It is freedom versus security, the global dimension, and we are privileged and honored that in fact two panelists, they do represent, I would say, the highest possible level. They are the best and brightest on this subject. And I would like to say a few words because in fact you have the bios in the program. Nevertheless, Aryeh Neier is kind of the icon of the community of researchers who are dealing with the human rights. And it is not my intention now to present his CV, but simply to mention that for 20 years he was a president of the Open Society Foundation, and before he served for 12 years as executive director of Human Rights Watch. He published a lot, very extensively, and in order, I would say, to not to waste our time, I will offer you in a minute, I would say, the floor. But before doing so, I would like to make a very brief introduction, namely, before coming to this session, I brought with me a publication which is composed of the presentations made here in Warsaw, not far from this building in Sheraton Hotel. It was a conference organized in '98 on globalization, power, and democracy. And they were very good speakers. Among them, it was, I would say, Samuel Huntington, who made very interesting comment. And I would like simply to say that he mentioned the Harvard Academy conference on conflict or convergence, global perspectives on war, peace, and international order. And in fact, this meeting brought the best and brightest people from many other countries who all, in fact, criticize very strongly the United States as being responsible for almost all the sins. They see the United States, said Huntington, as intrusive, interventionist, exploitative, unilateralist, hegemonic, hypocritical, applying double standards, engaging in what they label financial imperialism and intellectual colonialism, and pursuing a foreign policy driven overwhelmingly by domestic politics. Particularly, it was, I would say, addressed to the Israeli lobby in the United States. And I would like to say that the Russians, for example, oppose a world based on a dominant US leadership, which would border on hegemony. In similar words, it was the comments were made by Chinese participants of this conference. I mentioned all this with an intention to say that, in fact, it is a problem because a lot of the elements which were discussed on the previous session, they are connected with our session. Because the problem is, for example, of the role of state and non-state actors. And I would like to say that in different disciplines, from the point of view, for example, of international law, the state has a very simple definition. It is the composition of three elements: the territory, population, and effective power over territory and population. This is the state. Non-state actors are all the other actors who do not correspond to these three criteria. In other words, it seems to me that one should not mix different perspectives, because from the point of view of sociology or economy, the definition of the state will be quite different. But since we are discussing the problem from the perspective of the international relations and security, it is a very important element to understand that, in fact, the state is still in the center, however, not the only one, because for centuries the state was the only subject of international law. Now, in recent 50 years after the Second World War especially, we have more and more non-state actors. Having said that, and this is my last point, which is addressed in fact to both our panelists, it is connected with the fact that discussing, I would say, freedom, we are discussing first of all values. But these values are, by many researchers, scholars, are considered as a kind of the common universal values. Now we know definitely that these values are not universal. They are rejected, as it was presented by the previous panelists during the previous session, that these values, which are considered as a kind of the fundamental values among Europeans, North Americans, they are not considered as fundamental or even common values in many other regions of the world. Having said that, I would like to ask Professor Neier to take the floor.
Is focused on freedom versus security. As one who has spent his entire career defending rights, I have often tried to argue that there is not a necessary conflict between freedom and security, that in fact freedom and security should be complementary and in fact are complementary. Yesterday, Jean-Marie Gehenno talked about states that are not governed or that are weakly governed. And he indicated that they are threats to freedom. They are states that are capable of providing neither security nor freedom. We also have the phenomenon of states that, if you will, are too strongly governed. We have states like Putin's Russia or China under the Communist Party and the particular leadership today of Xi Jinping, who has emerged as the strongest leader of China, probably since Mao. Those are states that do not allow or that repress intermediate institutions between the individual and the state. They do not allow citizens to accumulate any independent power by associating together in civil society. It's their aim to exclusively concentrate power in their own hands. My view is that states of that sort ultimately cannot be counted upon to provide cannot ultimately be counted upon to provide security, and they certainly don't provide freedom. They can't ultimately be counted upon to provide security because the power they exercise, I think, is transitory. Putin's Russia owes its legitimacy to a macho nationalism that I think cannot be sustained indefinitely. Xi Jinping's China owes its power to the ability of the state continuously to deliver rapid economic growth. And I think that also cannot be sustained indefinitely. I think that if we are to have a state that is capable of providing security in the long term, it has to be a state that enjoys a different kind of legitimacy, a legitimacy that can be sustained for an extended period. And I think the ability of a state to sustain its legitimacy for a long period is dependent upon that state's respect for freedom. The desire for freedom is not something that is temporary or confined to a given place in the world. I think it is something that crosses boundaries and crosses periods of time. In a period of many hundreds of years, people have struggled for greater and greater freedom. And I think that according that freedom to them is what can provide a form of legitimacy that can be sustained. And I think that the principal elements of that freedom are respect for equality, by which I mean principally equality before the law, not necessarily equality of outcome. I think it is respect for human dignity, and by human dignity I mean respect for privacy and for autonomy and for the significance of each individual as an end in herself or in himself, and not merely as a means to achieve some other end. I think that another component of freedom is liberty, by which I mean principally the liberty of inquiry and expression, the right to gather information, to know information, and to express oneself freely on the basis of the information that one collects. And I think the other main component of freedom is justice, and by justice I mean principally fairness in the way in which the society deals with a variety of issues. I think those produce the kind of legitimacy that can be sustained over an extended period. It is, of course, the case that freedom and security are often ranged against each other in particular matters that arise from time to time. And I think that one could choose an example of the kind of struggle that seems to take place between freedom and security. And I would choose the case of Edward Snowden to illustrate the kind of struggle that takes place. Snowden, as everybody knows, has disclosed a great deal of information about the surveillance practices of the National Security Agency of the United States. Previously, the practices that he has disclosed were not only kept secret, But in fact, the American government lied about those surveillance practices. The director of national intelligence in the United States, a man named James Clapper, testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee of the United States in March 2013. And one of the questions he was asked at the hearing was whether the National Security Agency collected information on Americans. And his response to that was not wittingly. That is, we don't consciously collect that kind of information on Americans. Snowden, who began releasing information about 3 months after General Clapper's testimony, demonstrated that what Clapper had said was a lie, that in fact the National Security Agency had collected information on virtually every telephone call that had been made in the United States since 2006, and that it had collected a vast amount of information on the basis of those calls. It had collected information on the recipients of those calls, on the time and duration of those calls, and it had compared that information to other information that it had in order to serve its own security purposes. Now, I think the value of what Snowden has done, and he is considered by many in the United States to have engaged in a very severe violation of security, is by disclosing that information, he has precipitated a debate about what kinds of surveillance practices are legitimate and, in fact, necessary in order to address the problem of international terrorism, and what kinds of surveillance practices, in fact, are unrelated to the question of terrorism, or go far beyond what the government may actually need in order to provide protection. When the National Security Agency listened in on the phone calls of Angela Merkel or the phone calls of Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, it was not engaged in collecting information about terrorism. When it listened in on the phone calls of business people in Indonesia, it was collecting trade information rather than information that was related to security. I don't know where we'll come out as a consequence of Snowden's revelations, but it seems to me that this is an example of where freedom has the opportunity to confine surveillance practices to a limited area where it actually serves the security interests that the National Security Agency was established to protect, and prevents the excesses, the wild excesses that the National Security Agency has engaged in. And if it results in something like that, it will create a legitimacy for the practices of the National Security Agency, which it could not have without the revelations of Edward Snowden. So one can look at something that he has done and say, this is freedom versus security. My own view of it is it's not freedom versus security. It's freedom in helping the United States to revert or to achieve a more legitimate operation. And that if it's legitimate, that in fact enhances the security of the United States. That when one confronts the kinds of challenges that exist today, the asymmetric challenges that come from those we have been referring to without defining the term, we've been referring to as non-state actors. That is, everybody from Al-Qaeda to corporations to the Islamic State. When we need to deal with those varieties of non-state actors, we cannot prevail if we do not enjoy legitimacy. At the same time, if we deal with the states that are excessively strong, that try to exercise too great power, and that threaten global security, the way in which Putin has threatened global security by his actions in Ukraine, the way China threatens global security by its actions in the South China Sea, that it is immensely important that those who confront these threats, both from states that are weak and ungoverned and from states that are excessively strong, have to enjoy legitimacy. That is the greatest protection for their security, and they can only achieve that protection for their security if such states are also respectful of freedom, respectful of rights. And so I would prefer to see not freedom versus security, but freedom and security. These are complementary goals, complementary values. They should not be seen as antagonistic to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In fact, it was a brilliant introduction to our discussion, and I would like now to give the floor to Saša Janković, who is the first ever Serbian ombudsman elected in 2007 and re-elected in 2012 for next 5 years term. In other words, it is, I would say, the person who is in practice responsible to protect the liberties and freedom of Serbian citizens. To what extent, in fact, in Serbia, it is, I would say, by the citizens, this contradiction between... Me? Okay. I just said that it doesn't work, but I was told by technicians that it works. I would like to say that my question is to you: to what extent the citizens of Serbia do not see a kind of the contradiction between the freedom and security? Because it seems to me that there are a lot of people in many regions, not only in Europe, but especially in the other regions of the world, but also what Professor Neier mentioned in Russia, where in fact authoritarian regime is not only accepted but supported by the majority of people because they give the priority to security, and the price is exactly the limitation of freedom by the democratic choice. It is a democratic decision of millions of people for whom security is much more important than the freedom. You have the floor.
Thank you. Well, when you say that people have the choice to be able really to choose, they should be properly informed about the alternatives. So, to be able to choose, people must be properly and fully informed about the choices or alternatives which are ahead of them. And I'm afraid that citizens are not fully informed of the consequences of the choices that they make, and therefore we can quite frequently hear statements of citizens which say, I don't care if they are wiretapping, I don't have anything to hide. And they believe that they have made a choice. I strongly believe that they were not fully informed of all the consequences of the choice, and this is one of my tasks. So obviously we are in a state of war against terror, and we have many other wars ongoing at this very moment of a different kind. So this is a reality. And I do have a serious doubt about the quality of the policies which our governments adopted in order to confront the challenges which are ahead of us. But unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not in position to change them. What I can only respect is the position of some leaders in some democracies, such as the Norwegian one. Let me remind you of the words of their Prime Minister, Jan Stoltenberg, after the atrocities murders in Utøya and Oslo. He said, "We are still shocked with what has happened, but we will never give up our values. Our response is more democracy, more openness, and more humanity, but never naivety." I was struck by such an open display of understanding that we are somehow in a vicious circle, fighting for freedom with means which are far away from democratic sometimes. What, in a position of ombudsman, what I have done and what I'm trying to do is to use what we have available within the state. Let me remind you, the ombudsman is a state authority, independent from executive, but still a state authority. And what I'm going to offer now is kind of temporary measure. Temporary is usually a state which lasts longer than any permanent state. And when I say temporary, I am saying that this will not remedy the core of the problem, but it might help us to achieve more trust of citizens in their own state, more legitimacy of the state, and therefore more authentic security. And I come to the main point, I come to the issue of control, of oversight of what our security services, what our security forces are actually doing in order to fulfill their goal. My first thesis is that there is absolutely no adequate control of the work of the security forces. We have just heard an example of head of a security service which has lied to a highest national representative body without real consequences. Had anyone else in any other area lied openly, the consequences would be terrible. We are simply being too soft, and we are given a picture that security is something so special, so mystified that we cannot comprehend it, and we must sacrifice our liberty in order to achieve it. And I feel like we are blackmailed. It is just like that pharmaceutical company openly saying, if you want the cure, some of you will have to be unethically tested, and that's it. Well, I believe and I know that it doesn't have to be like that. Yes, the price would be different and more effort will have to be made, but we can achieve even better results with more guarantees that our rights and liberties are respected. I say this because I'm one of rare ombudsmen in the world who is not restricted in overseeing our security services and our national security agencies. There is, in Serbian law and constitution, there is no whatsoever limitation to investigative powers of the ombudsman vis-à-vis police, military and security forces. And I actually am entitled to oversee and to have insight into the ongoing operations. No secrets can be held before the ombudsman, and I exercise this duty vigorously. Apart from individual cases and investigative powers, I am entitled also to propose changes to laws before the national parliament. And it happens so that actually 4 laws have been changed upon my proposal in the parliament, or after the parliament refused it, I went to the constitutional court, and the constitutional court stood by my position and annulled the laws. And the laws were regulating the work of our national security service, our national military security services, a criminal procedure code, and work of the military. All of them, all of those laws were even against the constitution of Serbia. They were giving powers to our security services, which are absurd. And everyone knew it, and somehow our politicians, primarily our politicians, subscribed to it. Willingly, they have made the choice to adopt the law against the constitutional guarantees. And always, when we discuss this in private, they would say, Saša, get real. This has to be done. And then when you enter the work of the services, you understand that it's actually not true. So what I'm trying to say is, if we cannot still change the original paradigm or original dichotomy, if we still have to balance the two, but although I don't believe that it is a true dichotomy, then we can make a difference by exercising more vigilant control and oversight over what is being done in our behalf, for our own good, as they say. Trust was the word which was mentioned yesterday several times. And strangely, trust is the word which was thrown at me so many times by the members of the services during the control, when they said, well, you should trust us. I don't believe actually that the word trust and the concept of trust should be in a foundation of our structure which should uphold our values and guarantee our security and liberty. I think that it is my duty not to trust or not to distrust, but to verify, to check the proportionality, to check the legality, and not as the courts usually do, just legality, but to check the reason behind the justiceness of what is being done. An anecdote, head of operations of our secret service, civilian secret service, is my family friend. We know each other for 20 years, we are friends, really, really great friends. And 4 years ago, I've been into inspection of a service. unannounced one, and I went into their space where they keep registry and actually where they keep all their ongoing files, active files. It's a room of huge metal safe boxes. And I asked that doors of all safe boxes are opened. So it was a wall of full of opened safe boxes and files were inside. And I wanted randomly to check some of them. And a friend of mine who was standing next to me and ordered that the boxes were opened, his nose started to bleed. That was how tense the situation was. Yes, we were friends, but I had my duty, and my duty was toward the citizens to guarantee to them, because they cannot do it themselves, to guarantee to them that what is being done properly. And he had his own duty to be as effective as possible. So instead of this concept of trust, I would actually substitute where the trust should be. I don't think it should apply in the relations between the control and the services. It should go back to where it belonged once, trust between citizens and the state. And that trust can be enhanced, strengthened, if we exercise the control of what's being done in our own name. In exercising this control, the state authorities, such as Ombudsman, must rely on open society, on media, on non-governmental organizations. But it is extremely important to understand that there is no substitute for the authentic state control over this. Media cannot substitute control of a state authority for so many reasons, in different parts of the world, varied reasons. Judiciary is not enough. This was an old concept. Judiciary and parliamentary control will be our guardians of the guardians. Judiciary focuses on pure legality. And again, I recall the example from the previous speaker. Parliamentary control is controlled by politicians. There are in our democracies specialized institutions specialized in human rights. My focus is on human rights, on citizens' rights. And I'm entrusted not by the citizens by popular vote, but I'm entrusted by the state to control the state. So there should be no obstacle to it. Yet, most of my colleagues have in laws on which regulate their operations, sentence, national security issues are exempt from control of ombudsman. And I wonder why. And even more, I wonder why and how come that we accept it as a given. So this is what I wanted to say for the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, I don't know whether it is working. Yes. Yes. I would like to say that you are in a lucky situation for the reason that, in fact, being re-elected as an ombudsman by Serbian parliament, you have had support of all the parties. It means that it is not the subject of the political controversy. But in addition, I would like to say that in my view, the fundamental problem, how to reconcile the freedom and security, is connected with the political, but first of all, a legal culture in different societies. I spent a lot of time in Sweden, and I have to say that this, the same norm, what is introduced in Poland and in Sweden, works in totally different way because of the legal culture, which is deeply rooted in the Swedish mentality, that the law has to be respected. In other words, the rule of law, it is not only the collection of some norms, laws, regulations, but first of all, to what extent it is internalized by people in their everyday life. Unfortunately, we do not have too many in many parts of the world, but definitely also in Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, it is a kind of the tradition to resist against the state for good reasons, because the state was very oppressive. And the result is that having already for 25 years, as it is the case in Poland, the free elected democratic state, nevertheless, I would say it is a kind of the traditional approach that state should be resisted. And my second point is connected with the fact that it is to great extent depends, I would say, the problem of reconciling the freedom and security in different parts of the world is connected with the tradition and mentality. For example, in Asia, transparency is not seen as a kind of the value. It is, I would say, in fact, a weakness. In our part of the world, in the United States, in Europe, transparency is a very important inherent element of the human rights, and I would say the general system of respect for the individual of the individuals and respect for their rights. I would like to give you an example that being for many years director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, I have had an intention to offer the translation of the CIPRI yearbook, which is collected of many materials considered in many parts of the world as secret, confidential, just to offer them in translation. And in some parts of the world it was, I would say, taken with the lack of understanding for a simple reason. They told me that, in fact, you are offering us information which is, and it has to be available only for the leadership, for the government, not for people on the street, because they are very responsible data which could be misused by terrorism. And for me, I would say, to persuade them that transparency is more important than secrecy was not an easy task. At the end of the day it happened, but I would like to say that in Arab world and also in some Asian countries, it was really very, very difficult to persuade. By the way, I would like to say that in China, it is a kind of the evidence that the process of change in China is really taken seriously, not only by elites, but by some people in the government, was that it was their initiative. They wanted to translate this type of information for the broader public and to make them transparent. All in all, my intention is to say that we have to take under consideration that the level of trust and confidence among the people in the countries with a long tradition of respect for law is much broader than in the rest of the world. As the result, we have very often in many countries human rights, it is a kind of the facade. And for example, since I started from quoting this Samuel Huntington's report about the conference, I would like to give you one additional quotations that he said in the views of Russian elites, and he quoted here former Prime Minister of Russia, Evgeny Primakov, yes, in the views of Russian elites, the Moscow participant Primakov said that the United States subjects Russia to a policy of coercive cooperation, and all Russians oppose, I'm quoting, a world based on a dominant US leadership which would border on hegemony. In other words, I would like to say that I'm quoting this with an intention to say that some people who are considering that the present position of Russia is up to Putin are wrong in a sense, because at that time when this quotation was published, it was before people knew about the existence of Putin. He was at that time one of the civil servants in St. Petersburg and did not play a role for Russia. In other words, the policy is much more serious in a sense that it is inherited in the views of millions of Russians for whom Putin is reflecting, I would say, their dignity as a state, as a global power, to a much greater extent than those who are defending the freedom and human rights. And this is an element which should be also taken under consideration when we are discussing the problems of the price of freedom. Now I would like to ask my panelists whether they would like to make comments to each other. Otherwise, I will give the floor to the audience. Professor Neier.
The only comment I'd like to make relates to what you had to say about transparency, because I think transparency is a critical component of efforts to promote human rights. But it's one of the areas where I feel very encouraged by developments. You mentioned that in Asian countries, the concept of transparency has not been valued to such an extent. But in recent years, a number of the Asian countries have adopted right to information laws. And in India, in particular, the right to information law seems to be used perhaps even more than any place else in the world. It is having a profound effect in India, and other countries in the region, including Bangladesh and Pakistan, have also now adopted right to information laws. And China has not adopted a right to information law, but a few years ago they did adopt a right to information regulation. They decided to hold in abeyance the question of the law to see how it would work out. And China suffers from a series of environmental disasters, but the right of information regulation is used in China principally in the environmental area, and I think it is having an impact even within that kind of authoritarian system. I also want to say, and with respect to your reference to Putin, I see Putin as a figure who comes after a period of national humiliation, of a period in which there had been an empire, the Soviet Empire, and then the Soviet Empire collapsed, and the economy of Russia collapsed, and in a way the society collapsed. The level of alcoholism in Russia in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union was so high that it contributed to a declining population. So many people died, young men particularly died of alcohol poisoning. Young men died from drug injection and diseases associated with drug addiction. And so after a period of national humiliation, we have this very macho figure who shows that he's strong, that he's even willing to send his troops into other countries, into to Moldova, into Georgia, into Ukraine, and he enjoys this, I think, again, transitory legitimacy because he is behaving in that kind of way. And ultimately, I think somebody like that has within him the seeds of his own downfall, that he will be, so taken with his own glory that he will go too far. When Tolstoy wrote about Napoleon, ultimately Tolstoy's argument about Napoleon was that Napoleon considered that he was not bound by the rules that applied to everyone else, the laws that applied to everyone else. And ultimately, Napoleon brought about his own collapse because everybody is subject to the rules that apply to all of us. And Putin, to me, is a Napoleon figure. And I think Tolstoy would see within Putin the seeds of his own downfall. When it will happen, how it will happen, I don't know. But I do not believe that the kind of legitimacy that he enjoys in Russia today can be maintained indefinitely.
Thank you very much. I would like to continue what you said, that I do remember that in 2000 he published his first expose in the internet, and it was under the title Dictatorship of Law, which was taken by many and myself as something very interesting, that in fact I would say for the democracy it is a fundamental element, the rule of law. Without democracy cannot exist without the rule of law. Rule of law can be established without democracy. The many non-democratic authoritarian states like Prussia, Austria, they respected the rule of law, but they were not democratic. Unfortunately, in case of Russia, at that time, when at the Research Staff Collegium, I noted that everybody should see, I would say, this text, because it is an open question. In this article, in the title, there are two words, dictatorship and law, and 50% is for sure. And the rest is an open question.
I would say that
yes.
You referred to Russia earlier as an authoritarian system. I actually don't think of it as an authoritarian system. I think of China as being authoritarian. To me, Russia today is a despotic system, a sultanistic system, that Putin's authority is one that he exercises individually. He can be generous at one moment, he can be harsh at another moment. He reserves to himself the ability to act the way the Sultan does. It's not a steady authoritarian system of the sort that we have in China. They both are significant and severe challenges to world order, to world peace, to the democratic systems that one tries to bring into being in the rest of the world. But they are different challenges.
Thank you very much. Would you like to make a comment?
Maybe just a word on tradition, which you mentioned. And this is usually an argument of opponents of the control of the security sector, that it's not traditional, that it is traditional that this sector is exempt from ordinary control. Somehow they are not as traditional when they use new means and technical skills. Somehow this tradition is supposed to cover only their own internal interests. And sometimes that tradition isn't actually a tradition. There was a law on secrecy in Serbia debated 6 years ago, and the law was drafted by a distinguished professor who I knew at the time that had links with security service. And the law on secrecy had a very peculiar article. It said all state officials are allowed to see secrets which are necessary for them to obtain their duties, which is fine. And then the wording of the norm said, except ombudsman and commissioner for free access to information of public importance and personal data protection. So it was so absurd that I went public, and commissioner for free access to information of public importance together with me. We went public and we had an open dialogue in our radio TV station with the professor. And he said, it is traditional. I knew very well that it wasn't a tradition that he was defending. So, gender equality, is it traditional in our countries? No. Should we give up on it? No. So I believe that there are strong reasons, and I respect tradition. Frequently when someone comes with a new breakthrough in property law, I'm very doubtful. But in these terms, in security terms, tradition is more frequently abused than a used term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Now the time is for the audience questions, comments, reflections. Yes, Patricia Sassner, you have the floor.
I like the concept of transitory legitimacy very much. And again, I need to relate it to the Arab world, where at least 20 countries enjoy that transitory legitimacy nowadays. So translating this concept to policy decisions, and that's my question to you, Professor Neier. What would you recommend that the international community or the states that are considered more democratic on the spectrum from no freedom to freedom, that they act, and how do they construct their policy decisions towards those countries that enjoy this transitory legitimacy? Because if they come into conflict with these authorities, they also risk antagonizing the people who are legitimizing for the time being the authorities. But with a view of the future, something, I guess, should be done. So can this movement towards permanent legitimacy be pushed from the outside? And if so, how?
Thank you very much. Would you like to respond now? Yes, please.
You want to take more questions?
Yes, maybe. Yes, you have the floor, please.
Pytanie do pana rzecznika. Specyfiką służb specjalnych jest to, że czasami wytwarzają materiały dezinformacyjne. Czy pan w swojej pracy rozróżnia te niuanse? Z całym szacunkiem dla pana. Jeżeli pan nie natrafił na to, to znaczyłoby, że służby specjalne Serbii są bardzo, że tak powiem, słabe. Dziękuję.
Czy są jakieś inne pytania? Bardzo proszę.
Ja chciałem do pana profesora Rotfelda zwrócić się. Pan powiedział, prawo międzynarodowe to reguluje terytorium, ludność i jeszcze tam nie dopisałem.
Ludność i tak. Kontrolę nad terytorium i ludnością.
Tak, reguluje kontrola. Prawo międzynarodowe. I teraz jest pytanie takie. Czy państwo, które nie ma poczucia bezpieczeństwa, może regulować, może być skutecznym państwem obrony praw człowieka? I w tym zapytam się o konkretną sprawę, która rozgrywa się niedaleko nas na Ukrainie. Na dzień dzisiejszy mamy sytuację tego typu, że jest zagadnienie integralności państwa, czyli Ukrainy, i z drugiej strony mamy problem humanitarny, czyli problem ludności, tam na tym części wschodniej. I problem ludności wschodniej wynika, nie będę ocenił, z czego wynika, ponieważ na poprzednim panelu było powiedziane, że można dysponować tym, czym informacja do mnie dopłynie. Ja mam taką informację, jaka dopływa z naszych mediów i innych środków przekazu. Między innymi z audycji Horyzont, którą tu siedzi pan autor tej audycji. I patrząc na to, co tam się dzieje i słuchy, które dochodzą, to tam zakrawa, bym powiedział, na element pewnego rodzaju terroru względem ludności cywilnej. A zatem jest to dosyć bardzo poważna sprawa. Jak wyważyć w świetle tej sytuacji zagadnienie integralności z punktu widzenia prawa międzynarodowego i układu humanitarnego, niebezpieczeństwa humanitarnego, które tam zaistniało względem ludności cywilnej?
Dziękuję bardzo. Czy są jeszcze jakieś inne pytania? Bardzo proszę.
Thank you. I was also very struck by the idea of transitory legitimacy. In a democracy, all legitimacy is transitory. No politician can expect that they're going to be legitimately accepted for an indefinite period of time. There is, however, a difference between a system that is a personalized system, such as Napoleon's system, such as Putin's system, and a system in which the legitimacy of the state as a whole, the regime as a whole, is regularly renewed by democratic election, in which power can be transferred peacefully and lawfully from one political camp to another political camp, according to the fundamental right of the voters to change their government if they don't like it. So that in order to make that legitimacy something which is less transitory, more permanent, it is not just a case of a state trusting its citizens, respecting their rights. It's also a case of a regular renewal of that legitimacy on a democratic basis. I was also struck, Professor, by your reference to despotism, to the Sultan. I very much detect the echoes of Montesquieu, the patron saint of the American Constitution here. I think one of the things that Montesquieu can teach us is that it's not so much about sort of establishing what the universal human rights are, because we'll never agree on those. What we can agree on is that despotism is the worst of all possible worlds, and that the way to prevent despotism is to make sure that no one has too much power.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much. Some other questions? Czy ktoś chciałby jeszcze zabrać głos? If not, then I will ask you, Professor, to...
With respect to the first question, and that is, how does a legitimate state or a democratic state act towards other governments that enjoy a transitory legitimacy, and specifically that was applied to 20 or 22 Arab states. I think it's obvious that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, that there have to be differences in the policies that one applies to different states, but the policies should be consistent in standing for certain values. So that if one thinks in terms of the Arab states, and let me pick three as example. Let me pick Bahrain, Oman, and Egypt. Bahrain is a state where there has been a revolution underway. It's a revolution that has been suppressed through the extensive use of torture, through banning demonstrations, through political imprisonment. The leaders of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights are in prison today. If you're thinking in terms of the policies of the United States, Bahrain is important to the United States because the United States has its main naval base in the Gulf in Bahrain. Bahrain is very much supported by the government of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is crucial economically to the United States in terms of the supply of oil. But nevertheless, despite the significance of Bahrain to the United States, I think the United States should be standing up for human rights in the context of Bahrain to a much greater extent than it has, because this is a government that is clearly engaged in gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. If you think in terms of Oman, it's a somewhat benevolent authoritarian system. You can stress the authoritarian part, but you could also stress the benevolent aspect of Oman. Does one have to go around denouncing the authoritarianism of the Sultan of Oman? That doesn't seem to me a very pressing issue, because I don't see great violations of human rights taking place in Oman. If I think in terms of Egypt, that gets very complicated. Egypt is the most populous Arab state. It is in many ways the most powerful of the Arab states. But the United States has its own laws, which included a requirement that certain aid should be cut off if there is a military coup that overthrows a democratically elected government. And for the United States to refuse to acknowledge that a military coup took place that overthrew a democratic government is to betray its own laws. The United States did not stand up for the appropriate values in connection with Egypt. So I think in each case, one has to look at the particulars, stand up for values that should be permanent, but the actual approach in each state would have to vary in accordance with the particular circumstances that prevail at the given moment. As far as the other comment with respect to transitory states, I basically agree with what you had to say. So I don't really know that I need to respond in any way to your comment.
Thank you very much. Now, Saša, Janković, the question was addressed to you about the interdependence between special services and the protection of individual freedom and liberties.
The question targeted the need to use some special techniques which are special to these services, and of course deceit is traditionally used by those services, and sometimes it might be needed just like all other measures. The question is, who is the target of deceit? I see no reason why this question shouldn't be answered to legally and legitimately elected representatives of the authority. I see no reason why question of proportionality shouldn't be asked regarding those special measures and techniques. too many times in history those measures have been used for purposes which were not legitimate or legal. And too many times we have seen that the control exercised by the political masters is not adequate. Masters want to be pleased, and services like to please their masters. But several years ago, I held a small seminar for members of Iraqi National Council. We were grouped in Beirut, and with me there was a security officer of our military security service who was there for my benefit. And then I have asked him to come and to answer to some questions of the members of the Iraqi National Council. And at the end, he told them that he would like to tell them something which they didn't ask. And then he told them, we, the services, what we like the most when you abuse us. Of course, he was slightly ironic, but again, I just wanted to reiterate the notion that no one has a certificate of a patriotism, that members of the services are not bigger patriots or better law abiders, or they are not more better traditionalists than anyone else, that they are simply conducting a duty, very important duty, special duty, but it is a duty, and that some of us have a duty to make sure that they do their duty properly. And again, coming back to the big topic, I think that this is one slight piece of a puzzle that could bridge the gap between security and liberty more closer.
Thank you very much. With your permission, I will now switch to Polish, ponieważ pytanie było zadane po polsku. Ja mam wrażenie, że powinienem odpowiedzieć również panu w sposób możliwie krótki, ponieważ problem, który pan poruszył, jest niezwykle szeroki. Po pierwsze, co się tyczy tej definicji złożonej z tych trzech elementów, to jest definicja Grocjusza z początku XVII wieku i która przetrwała w istocie rzeczy przez cały okres tak zwanego porządku westfalskiego. To znaczy pokój westfalski wprowadził tę koncepcję państwa jako złożonego z tych trzech elementów. Terytorium, określona ludność i skuteczna władza, kontrola wykonywana nad terytorium i ludnością. Otóż z tego punktu widzenia chcę powiedzieć, że w dzisiejszym świecie mamy 194 państwa i spośród nich, w moim przekonaniu, 60 państw z całą pewnością nie odpowiada tym trzem kryterium. To znaczy w szczególności kwestionowana jest ta ostatnia sprawa dotycząca kontroli nad terytorium i ludnością. To znaczy nie zawsze jest ludność dokładnie zdefiniowana, nie zawsze granice, ale z całą pewnością około 60 państw nie jest w stanie zapewnić kontrolę nad swoim własnym terytorium i wziąć w opiekę własnych obywateli. Im słabsze państwo, tym więcej swobody dla działania rozmaitego typu niepaństwowych aktorów, o których była dzisiaj już mowa, ale mam tutaj na myśli przede wszystkim nie takich niepaństwowych aktorów, non-state actors, takich jak organizacje pozarządowe, koncerny, wielkie organizacje, że tak powiem, transnarodowe. Mam na myśli przede wszystkim organizacje kryminalne i wszelkiego typu działalność terrorystyczna, pranie brudnych pieniędzy, nielegalny handel bronią i tak dalej. Otóż to wszystko się odbywa przede wszystkim na tych terytoriach, na terytoriach tych państw, które określane są w literaturze, ale już nie tylko w literaturze, teraz już również w dokumentach, jako państwa upadające lub upadłe, failing or failed states. Do tego dochodzi jeszcze grupa państw, które co prawda nie są upadłe, ale są bardzo słabe. I Ukraina w moim przekonaniu dzisiaj należy do tej kategorii państw słabych, która z całą pewnością nie jest w stanie kontrolować rozwoju wypadków na swoim terytorium, zwłaszcza w odniesieniu do pogranicza na południowym wschodzie z Rosją. Znaczy nie tylko Ługańsk i Donieck, ale to jest obszar nieco większy, co jest takie z pewnego punktu widzenia zabawne. Mianowicie prezydent Putin, o którym pan profesor Neier słusznie powiedział, że to jest taki rodzaj personalizmu w państwie autorytarnym, jeszcze jest bardzo personalne podejście. Otóż to personalne podejście w moim przekonaniu jest charakterystyczne dla tych państw, które nie mają silnych instytucji prawnych i nie mają procedur. A jeżeli te procedury, instytucje prawne są, to mają charakter fasadowy. Niemniej problem polega na tym, że przywódcy takich państw, prezydent Putin do nich należy, w istocie rzeczy, jak wypowiadają jakieś sądy, to one są traktowane nieomalże jako prawo stanowione. Otóż on powiedział, że to nie jest problem Rosji, kiedy zwrócono się do niego, ażeby on wziął odpowiedzialność za rozwój wypadków na pograniczu rosyjsko-ukraińskim, gdzie w sposób oczywisty te siły separatystyczne są przez Rosję inspirowane, finansowane, wspierane, a bardzo często są po prostu kierowane. Otóż on powiedział, że jest to problem wewnątrzukraiński. Wielu to skrytykowało. Ja uważałem, że to jest pozytywna wypowiedź, mianowicie, że on uznaje integralność terytorialną Ukrainy, że niezależnie od tego, co my sądzimy na temat tych separatystów, to pozytywny element jest to, że Rosja uznaje integralność terytorialną z wyłączeniem Krymu, który został już formalnie inkorporowany do Rosji. Te tereny, Donieck, Ługańsk i szersze tereny są traktowane jako część integralna Ukrainy. Otóż problem polega na tym, że do tego momentu wszystko się rozwija pozytywnie, nazwijmy to. Negatywne jest w tym momencie, kiedy ja słyszę w rosyjskiej telewizji, że występuje rzecznik Ministerstwa Spraw Wewnętrznych oraz rzecznik prokuratury i oświadczają, że oni wszczęli dochodzenie w sprawie przestępstw dokonanych przez Ukraińców na Ukraińcach na tym terytorium. To znaczy, innymi słowy, nie ukraińska prokuratura, ale rosyjska prokuratura w Moskwie uruchamia śledztwo na terytorium innego państwa w sprawie przestępstw dokonanych przez obywateli innego państwa na własnym terytorium. Ja rozumiem, że gdyby rosyjska prokuratura zwróciła się, jak to się dzieje między wszystkimi państwami, które kierują się zasadą prawa, zwróciła się z prośbą o pomoc prawną, że jest taki problem, oni zwracają uwagę i zwracają się o to, aby ukarać winnych. Otóż my nie wiemy, kto jest winny. Znaczy, być może to dokonali tego obywatele Ukrainy, którzy są podporządkowani, są lojalni wobec własnego państwa, a być może to dokonali obywatele Ukrainy, którzy wobec własnego państwa lojalni nie są, ale nie jest wykluczone też, że dokonali tego obywatele innego państwa, którzy na tym terytorium dopuścili się przestępstw. Zmierzam do czego? Zmierzam do tego, że słabość ukraińskiego państwa polega na tym, że ono nie jest w stanie dzisiaj egzekwować niczego, co jest sprzeczne z interesami swojego wschodniego sąsiada, który wymusza określone zachowanie. Innymi słowy, nad tym bym przerwał, bo to jest problem sam w sobie, ale chciałem po prostu wyjaśnić panu, który zadał pytanie, że ten problem jest problemem o wiele szerszym niż jedna konkretna sprawa. I teraz, powiedziawszy to, w moim przekonaniu stoimy wobec pewnego problemu. To jest mój drugi punkt na zamknięcie tej naszej sesji. Mianowicie, że my traktujemy prawo stanowione lub polityczne normy, które z czasem mogą przybrać charakter prawa, jako coś takiego trwałego i statycznego. Otóż trzeba sobie powiedzieć, że to, co się wydarzyło w ostatnim czasie w świecie, nie tylko na pograniczu rosyjsko-ukraińskim, ale co się wydarzyło w świecie przede wszystkim w Zatoce Perskiej, na Bliskim Wschodzie, na Dalekim Wschodzie. Otóż jesteśmy świadkami bardzo poważnego przesuwania się, nazwijmy to, płyt tektonicznych, które tworzą nowy krajobraz polityczny świata. I ten krajobraz się jeszcze do końca nie ukształtował. Następuje nie tylko zmiana układu sił, ale zmiana tych głównych aktorów, mam na myśli wielkie mocarstwa, które w stosunkach międzynarodowych ponoszą szczególną odpowiedzialność. To są stali członkowie Rady Bezpieczeństwa. Otóż nie ulega dla nas wątpliwości, dla nikogo w tej sali i dla nikogo w świecie, że ta grupa 5 wielkich mocarstw, które z mocy Karty Narodów Zjednoczonych uchwalonej w czerwcu w San Francisco i przyjętej definitywnie 24 października jako fundament i taki najważniejszy dokument prawa międzynarodowego. Otóż od tego czasu świat się zmienił wielokrotnie i uregulowania tam przyjęte wymagają uzupełnienia. I na różny sposób te nowe uregulowania były przyjmowane, ale nie to jest przedmiotem mojej intencji w tej chwili. Przedmiotem mojej intencji jest powiedzenie rzeczy następującej, że lekceważenie tej tak zwanej szarej strefy, gdzie w istocie rzeczy nastąpiła zmiana sytuacji w świecie, a normy prawne nie są adekwatne do tej zmiany, wymusza niejako na państwach obowiązek uregulowania tej szarej strefy. Innymi słowy, mamy do tej pory do czynienia z takimi 3 stanami. Są stany prawne, są stany bezprawne i są stany nieprawne, pozaprawne, które nie są uregulowane. Otóż konieczność uregulowania tego, co należy do tej strefy szarej, pozaprawnej, czyli mamy po angielsku byśmy to powiedzieli, że to jest legal, illegal and non-legal. Illegal to jest bezprawne i non-legal to jest pozaprawne. Otóż te pozaprawne sytuacje wymagają uregulowania, ale to jest temat już być może do innej konferencji. Chciałbym jeszcze na zakończenie podziękować panelistom, którzy byli w moim przekonaniu rzeczywiście na najwyższym poziomie i zasługują na naszą wdzięczność. Serdecznie dziękuję profesorowi Neierowi i Saszy Jankowiczowi.